Okay, if you can hear us, please let us know. Typing on the side, typing anywhere. If you are watching a recording, welcome to Noble Warrior. My name is CK Lin. This is a place where entrepreneurs talk about the real deal of building a purpose-driven life, a purpose-driven organization. We're going to talk about mindset. We're going to talk about mental models. We're going to talk about actionable tactics, such that you can go out and create a life of meaning and fulfillment and joy. My next guest is a music and mindfulness coach. He's the founder of Yoga of Guitar and Yoga of Ukulele. He is a master music teacher and transformational guy with over 32 years of experiences. Please welcome Josh Brill.
Thank you, CK. It's really good to be here.
Thank you so much for being here, Josh. I'm so looking forward to having this conversation. And here's why I'm particularly interested in hearing your story. Now, in your other public appearances, you had said earlier that you weren't always a gifted music student. You weren't gifted with this gift. You weren't blessed with it. Mm-hmm. And then now you are a master teacher and a master coach, a guide, to help others to learn the musical skills. So I would love to hear, just to set a context for any people who is listening. Tell us a little bit of that journey from someone who had a calling for music, but who weren't so gifted with it. And then how did you become such a masterful teacher?
Yeah, the short answer is time and effort, 32 years of learning and practicing and learning and practicing. Yeah, that's the short answer. The a little bit of a longer answer would be something inside of the 8-year-old self knew it needed to do this thing. And even though I don't feel like I was naturally gifted as a musician, some people happen to have an acuity or, that sort of alignment developed. For me, it wasn't, but I had tenacity. There was something inside of me that knew I needed to do this thing. So I did it. And there's been a lot of blessings. It's interesting what, being a gifted musician and all these words, like I've noticed in my professional life and through this whole perspective, it ends up being the rarer of the case. And even the people who have been given gifts, they still have to work on developing technique and finding their craft and their art. But what I'm recognizing now is I was given a lot of gifts. It wasn't the ones that I thought they were, basically. I was given the gift of knowing I needed to do this and having tenacity. I had amazing teachers at every level of my progression. I had the perfect teacher for that moment or that period of time. My first teacher was really, really good at helping me find ways to engage with the instrument and find creative practices. It wasn't just learn this, but it was really he was in tune with myself, and I felt, and he was a good teacher. He was sometimes, especially in the musical world, in the guitar world, you have guitar teachers by default that maybe they didn't make it or they're trying to make it as a professional musician, so this is what they're doing. But maybe their heart's not into it, or they don't even know how to teach well. He was a good teacher. He still is. He's still teaching. And then my next teacher was appropriate for that phase. And then after that, my next one. So I would say, just looking back, it's been time. It's been having the proper guides along the way. And I always felt it was possible. So even when it was difficult or seemingly impossible, there was a part of me that knew there was a way to do this. If other people can do it, then I can as well. And it then became almost like a puzzle. Like, what do I need to figure out inside? Like, okay, I'm not hearing that note, or my time is off, or I'm struggling with this. Why is that? And how come that's happening? And I think that sort of the inner inquiry really was another gift along the way to get from very beginner to now, which it's an interesting journey, I suppose.
Yeah, so I'm particularly interested in speaking to you because the way you describe your younger self actually aptly describes someone like me,
Uh-huh.
right? Who is interested in music, who's not particularly gifted, and who's also super heady.
Yeah.
Right? So I
Right.
love your philosophy of, you know, your way of teaching, and of which we'll dive into it more later on. But I
Mhm.
want to do a quick recap. You know, for those of you who are listening, what Josh just beautifully articulated is it to me sort of the map of learning anything. So we're gonna
Mm.
do not just his story, but also the metacognition aspect of it, learning how to learn, right? This aspect. So that way you can take this on to learn a musical instrument if you like, starting a business if you like, and so on and so on, right? So
Yes.
what you said, you were gifted with a vision, which is rare, by the way. You know what the you're very clear about your vision, and then you also had a belief in the path. If other people can do it, I could do it too. So it's a
Yes.
learnable skill. It's not some intangible thing out there that you can never get to. And then you were very strategic, very intentional about finding the right teacher, solving a particular problem, so you can, step by step, moving towards this vision that you have. Is that an accurate reflection of what you said?
Yeah. I mean, some of it was, a lot of it was blessings along the way of the teachers, of being in the right, like I didn't find my first teacher, like intentionally, but yeah, what you're saying, yeah, I'm getting a little bit nitpicky on some of the words, but yeah.
Okay, good. So here's one thing I would want to ask you is this: there's a different there's a number of different ways we can go about it, but here's the first question. Sometimes the vision is so grand that it feels like a weight, and it and it could easily become despair.
Mhm.
Like, oh, my skill dwarfs in comparison to this vision that I have.
Yeah.
How did you keep going and overcome this internal burden and then keep going anyway, chipping away, chipping away, chipping away, in spite of, I'm sure, the initial days were really difficult. You know, you didn't see
Yeah.
any results coming back. There's no positive feedback. There's no applause. You know, your teacher may even be a little bit harsh on you, right? So how did you overcome this internal barrier of, no positive feedback during the initial days?
Yeah. And it's interesting as you're asking that, like the different phases of I think my progression of learning. That was a pretty constant. It We always want more, I suppose, and it's hard to just accept where we're at, and it's actually a beautiful part of learning music is at every level of growth you begin to be like, oh, but I want that. It's a little bit intoxicating and addicting, and it can be frustrating and overwhelming at the same point. And I feel like throughout the whole process, the navigating that is tricky and something to sort out. In my own experience, when I was a very very beginner, I mean, I was 8, so I was blessed with a certain youthful naivete, and this was '88 as well, so pre-internet. Maybe we had a VHS player, but there wasn't a whole lot of distractions in the world. We didn't have cable at the time, so I guess I didn't have a lot. There was no comparison at that point. I just knew I wanted to do it, and but it was hard. I mean, I do remember moments of not practicing, of course, as any beginner oftentimes does, whether they're 8 or 38 or 58. It's challenging at first. Like you are moving a boulder. And as you're saying, like it takes some time until you get some momentum, some positive feedback, some feeling of success. I remember crying, my parents being like, well, if you're not going to practice, we're going to stop lessons. And there was something inside of me that just knew I needed to do it. And it came out, I remember emotionally of just like, no, I don't stop. I really wanted to do it. I remember my first lesson, and the teacher showed me 2 chords. He showed me a G chord with the played with just 1 finger, and then a D chord, which is 3 fingers. And I remember going out home after the lesson and practicing the G with just this 1 finger on 1 string, and I could do it. And I was like, wow, that's great. And then this D chord felt impossible. And I remember that. And I remember I mean, I don't think I had all the cognition at the time, but I remember the experience of like, well, I know this one is possible, so this other one must be possible at some point. And I just got to get there, I suppose, But like at that point in my life, there wasn't a pressure about it. It was just, I guess, it was just sort of like a childhood curiosity and a magnetism to it. My teacher at that time, there was never any negative feedback. He was very supportive of the process. I mean, I'm sure if I didn't practice for a week and he knew it, there might be some, hey, what's up with that? Like checking in. But I never felt like I was in trouble, there was always a sense of encouragement. I would say later on in my development, when I was 12, I knew that's what I wanted to do with my life. Like it became very clear that this is like, it was just a knowing, okay, this is what I'm doing.
On the professional level, you want to just be a professional
exactly.
musician.
Yeah. Yeah. And there were times where I think in that development, especially maybe teenage years and 20s to some degree, where I did feel like I wasn't enough. In fact, I even saw a therapist for a little while because I was about 16 or 17 and I didn't feel like I was practicing enough. And I didn't know how to reconcile that because I wanted to practice more, but I didn't feel like it was enough. And it made me, I was confused by it. And I was hard on myself around it. And part of it because I did want to reach these next levels. And I think, one of the beautiful aspects of music as a teacher is it will show you what level of capability you're able to work with it. If you're very honest. Yeah, go ahead.
So pause on that for a moment,
Sure.
because in my mind, as a layman looking at musicians, music is so intangible. So it's hard for me to even grasp, oh, I'm level 1 versus 2 versus 4. It's not super scientific. But
You're right.
You have a perspective, you can actually objectively measure the level of skills that you may have. Can you share with us what that means?
Well, it's not like scientific in a very linear way per se, but how about this? If you ask your finger to do this and this hand to do this, and either the note comes out or it doesn't.
I see.
And if it comes out, is it clear? If you put 3 in a row, are you able to do that evenly? Are unintended notes happening along the way? So there's kind of like music gives a feedback of your, I suppose, acuity in that moment. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Thank you. I mean, that paints my skill, my musical skill playing the ukulele right now very, very well. My mind, it does something, and my finger just wouldn't catch up to what I wanted to do, for sure.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
So there was definitely really deep moments, especially having this pressure on myself of, I need to be this good. Like, this is my thoughts right now, to be able to do this thing that I know I need to do. And I would say there's sometimes that was the fuel for improvement and practice. Oftentimes it's not, though. And I don't think I really realized that until later life, somewhat recently, that personally I tend to, I don't work well under stress and pressure. And I had this cycle of putting pressure and stress on myself. And then I would be stressed and that I wasn't doing it. And I didn't really realize up until really kind of recently that part of the reason I wasn't doing it was because I had this pressure on myself to do it. Music is a beautiful teacher. If you stay with it, it really reveals a lot.
So since you brought it up, let's just go there right away. The way I kind of see our emotions or even our mental models, all of these is different types of fuel, right? So anger, resentment, you could use that as a motivational force, motivational fuel for sure, to show someone that, hey, you were wrong, I was right. Or coming from purpose or calling, something like that. So there are just different types of fuel. In my mind, using pressure or force or as a way, it's a very cheap fuel. right? And it does produce results initially,
For
but
some people.
right, for some people. And for me, initially it produced a lot of results. I would actually work, but then after a while, I also start to incur the cost of using this cheap fuel.
Right. Yeah.
Right? It's like, oh my God, the whole journey is so miserable. And the supposed joy and the destination is so fleeting too, because you
Yeah.
get like in the beginning was maybe a few days of joy, and then after that it's a few hours, and then a few minutes, and then at some point it becomes like nanoseconds of joy, and then this pressure comes down again. Okay, what's next, right?
Yeah.
So that's the way I think about it in terms of using different ways to motivate myself. What do you think?
Yeah. Well, I think that cheap fuel becomes expensive in the long term, like, um, yeah, I mean, one of the things that I've been learning as a teacher, and also recently, I feel like the way I'm showing up to the education and guidance with people, and music is sort of I would say the device of deeper self-exploration. I mean, personally, I'm less interested in showing somebody how to play a C chord versus helping people feel their hand from the inside out and understand their mind and kind of like connect to themselves. So the music becomes a part of that development of inner inquiry and alignment, tuning into harmony. And what I've been learning, we all have different fuels, I suppose. And part of, I think, one of the detriments of traditional musical education, and probably educational at large, is it seems like pressure has been one of the primary fuels that's like embedded in the system. And I don't know, I have a sense that most people learn better when when their nervous system is relaxed, not tensed up. There are some that do seem to benefit, like the David Goggins type of character, like the freaks of the world, and we seem to maybe use those freaks, and I use that in a positive way, an endearing way, as maybe a template of how we ought to be or how we're striving for. But the outliers might just be outliers. And what might serve the rest of us mortals is actually finding a path that's helpful for us. And I've personally found that a tense nervous system clogs the fuel pathways even. So whatever fuel might be available at the emotional level, if we are in a locked up place, it's not really going to support our progress or our ability to be in the moment with what we're doing, which music is 100% depends on. If we're not in the moment, it's not happening.
So you're speaking to an audience of high performers, right? People who enjoy learning, people who like to, see their life as an experimentation. They like to, explore what's possible for themselves, and also for their companies, for the community, for the planet, and so forth, right?
Yeah.
So in that respect, perhaps, have a really high standard of themselves. It's very clean pipe. They can easily access those fuel of like, hey, compare myself with Josh, compare myself with CK, compare myself with so and so. Why are you not there yet? It's that pipe to that type of fuel is very clean. It's very easily accessible. So for someone like you, because you had said the proclivity for you is to use that as well. How are you able to self-regulate? Oh, I'm choosing not to go down that route. I'm gonna choose joy and relaxation instead.
Well, it became a necessity for me.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah. I burned out at a certain point, like any good hero's journey. The point of burnout happened where I had so much stress from that mental framework of striving for excellence all the time that quite literally every note I played had all of this pressure on it. So it robbed the joy of the experience. And the stress accumulated into physical burnout. I had body issues, emotional burnout, mental burnout, just complete burnout. So I had to reframe my relationship with music from that standpoint. And that's when I really began to explore using music as a means to create relaxation and centering within the self, which then made the experience a whole lot more enjoyable and also functional at that point. I mean, I suppose I'm not a person who, like, some people are very exuberant in their life and they just, jump from one joy pod to the next joy pod. And that's what, drives them, they're literally following their bliss. For whatever reason, my karma quite isn't that way. And I function seems to be a very important part of what I'm doing, like the understanding of it. Yeah. So I think when I was able to reframe, and from the experiential level and necessity level of literally finding a way to use music to put myself back together in a way that I actually enjoyed music again and enjoyed life. It helped, me with my depression and anxiety and connecting to something deeper inside. So I guess like speaking to the high performers, those who have the very clean pipes and the burning fuel. I mean, if the process is enjoyable and it feels fulfilling at every step, then that's probably they're probably doing the thing that's right for them. They're playing the right notes for their life. If it feels so stressful or pressureful that the striving is robbing the joy of the moment or the presence of the moment, then there's probably something to look at in that and maybe find a way to reframe. Because, well, it's like if your goal is $1 billion and it takes you 90 years to get there, and you're so focused on that you've just spent those 90 years to reach that goal, and then now here you are, a decrepit human. I mean, maybe at that point you could invest into some, stem cells from a teenager or something. I don't know. But,
I have seen people try. I have yet to see someone being successful in reversing their aging or their decrepit body as well.
Yeah. I mean, it's probably around the horizon, but we're not there yet. But the point is that our moments, our present moment, and I think this is where the mindfulness part really comes into play, is our true currency. All we ever have is the present moment. We have had the past moments, and that can be an asset to our present moment. Our past moments can be an investment. All those hours I've spent practicing is an investment into the capability to have access to music. And, anything we're putting into can be an investment. We could also spend time, but we can invest it. And the future is unknown. We don't know how much of that is there. So all we really have in any moment is the moment. So then the question is, how much of the moment do we have? And what is our experience of that? And if we are sacrificing, sometimes we have to do the unpleasant things to get things done. And that's just kind of like part of the process. When you're learning an instrument, it's not always going to be joyful or fulfilling, but the aspiration helps keep us through. But if it's always that, and there's never anything that comes from a deeper level of satisfaction, there's probably something worth evaluating at that point and checking in about.
Yeah, for sure. I would also make it personal here.
Yeah.
The first time around is good. Like, hey, I got the results that I wanted. But after a few times of doing that, and then I saw a pattern.
Mm-hmm.
Like, wow, this is a no-win formula, because every time I do it, the more miserable the journey became, and then the more fleeting the joy of achievement became. So I was like, forget it. But I want to actually bring into more concrete terms, because the meta framework, what you just shared, is beautiful. So for someone who's experiencing, you said, hey, to look into the journey, is it always miserable? So are there indicators you can point to using your own experience, as well as what are some of the baby steps in tactical ways that they can start to walk themselves, move themselves from the cheap fuel to the more clean fuel?
Yeah, definitely there's indicators. So I think the analogy of, just as, I don't know if you can see my guitar here, but there's a guitar here. Just as a string, we tune these strings, and those strings are tuned to a specific frequency. That's objective in music. It's one of the places where music actually has objectivity. So if we use the analogy of literally our internal notes, or our string of, let's say, truth, maybe our soul, our conscience, intuition. When we are out of tune from that, there's indicators, and part of it is learning how to listen. I mean, it's very specific, and even doing this with music, I think, helps us listen internally. Here's two notes that are in tune together. If I detune this note a little bit, here's out of tune. And out of tune, the notes are kind of clashing against each other. In tune, literally the wave patterns come into a level of symmetry that we hear and feel. Until we've developed an acuity to listening, not everybody hears that just off the bat. I think most people, unless they truly have hearing issues, can be led to the awareness of hearing that and feeling that. And then they're like, oh yeah, that doesn't feel so good. And then there's two directions of out of tune. There's flat and sharp. And flat feels a certain way. In tune feels a certain way. And sharp feels a certain way. When things are flat, they're a little lower than where they ought to be. And perhaps we could look at that as an indicator internally as depression, basically, or loss of motivation, loss of something. Sharp would be anxiety, a constriction, this type of thing. So I think having a meditation or an internal practice that's self-guided, I think guided meditations are helpful, but at some point we need to learn how to do it ourselves internally, so that we are literally making a contact into something inside of us with a more spacious mind, which gives us more acuity to listen to the internal notes. Get a sense of are we in tune? Are we out of tune? If we're out of tune, is it flat or sharp, or sometimes both, because we're actually multiple notes. We have more than one string. And listen to and begin to find a level of learning how to calibrate that. And so, like, actual steps. If we are flat, obviously, like we're there's something that we're, the process is depleting us. And obviously lifestyle choices, food, drinks, things that can diminish our energy, things that we're ingesting into our brain, podcasts, YouTube things, TV, news, certain things can bring us into different notes, basically. And our work as well, our relationships at work, our relationship to the work. So I suppose if we're in a depressed state, we need to find a way to perhaps reconnect to the deeper purpose of what we're doing. Like that's just what's coming to me in this moment. If we are in a constricted or, sharp place with it, obviously we need to find a way to create more expanse.
Let me just do a quick recap of what you just said. So what you just said is start to pay attention and notice this internal resonance or dissonance,
yes.
Right? Whether it be depressed state or anxiety state. And then to start to basically unpack that more using a meditative practice or some kind of practice as a way to look at to observe ourselves internally. And then from that place then you can experiment with different, say, setting or peer group or music or diet or whatever the rituals may be. Then you can start to find some fine tuning of the dissonance or the resonance. Is that an accurate reflection?
Yeah, I think so.
Cool, beautiful. Any other practices that Josh or what you advise your students or the younger version of Josh to have?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think the music practice, when framed as this way, actually becomes a way to tune into feeling deeper, and as a way to help stabilize the mind. I mean, that's part of it too. It's a big part of it, really. We got this thing that does a lot of different things, and thinks a lot of different thoughts, and most of them are habitual, and they're generally directed in certain ways, oftentimes negative, I would say, for many people, and which I'm not just saying like be in a blissful rainbow and unicorn state, but I think negative is a thought pattern that assumes things are not possible, not likely, things like that.
Yeah,
basically.
in the realm of impossibility versus in the realm of possibility,
Yes.
in the
Yeah.
realm of contraction versus in the realm of expansion.
Yeah. Right. Well said. Yeah. So I think a big part of tuning, is learning how to begin to stabilize the mind. And we don't learn this as a child or even as an adult. And then when people do try to sit down to meditate, it's challenging. And oftentimes people say, oh, I'm not good at it. I'm not, like, even with me, same thing with music. Well, it takes a practice. So I think, speaking to my younger self or future self, even, or even current, and recognizing that really music, a function of music, and a very valid one, is a means to begin to stabilize the mind, specifically our attention, and begin to regulate it. If that begins to set, now we have an interior architecture that's stable, that we really can begin to build something on. And I think, yeah, like in addition, I mean, for my students, I mean, one of the beautiful feedback I've been really receiving is how much this is helping them feel calm using music as a meditation practice. So I think it's like reframing music from just a expression or creative pursuit, that it really, quite literally, working with the notes, the sounds, the rhythms, as a means of neural entrainment, of syncing up our brainwaves with kinesthetic movement and auditory awareness as the bridge in between, is a deep, deep, deep medicine for life.
I want to echo on what you just said, and then the image comes to mind is the bumpers around a bowling alley, as an example, right? Or transcendental meditation uses mantra as a way to guardrail the attention. Anytime you kind of veer off from your la la land, you always have a mantra to go back to.
Yeah.
Right. So similarly, I really like the fact that you use simple notes. And by the way, guys, I took Josh's course, a tremendous master teacher through and through. And one thing I really love about his course was he didn't go fancy right away, because most teachers would go into teaching you songs or chords and all these things. And he does do that. But he taught us on a fundamental note level, singular note, single string, and then really feel into the note. And from that place, then it grounds us mentally, emotionally, physically, right? So maybe you can say a little bit more about your own philosophical point of view around why focusing on something that most teachers don't even teach, which is, how you sit, how you hold, how you breathe, how you play the music.
So why I focus on that, or is that what you're asking me?
Yeah. So maybe okay. There's a lot we can go there. Maybe you can start off by talking about the fourth way, and then leading to.
We'll go simple first.
Right, and then lean into the mechanics, or you can do mechanics and then the philosophy. Whichever you like, Josh.
Yeah. Okay. So, fourth way. It's the name of a system presented by a mystic of the 20th century named Gurdjieff, who the depth of it is way too much for a lifetime, probably. Let's go with what's relevant to the process. One of the things that Gurdjieff shared was how we basically have different brain centers of our being. So not just the thinking brain, but that we also have a feeling or sensing brain, emotional center, and moving center. So we could say thinking, feeling, and moving as sort of three intelligences or awarenesses or attentions. We could think of those in that way. One of the things that Gurdjieff said is what part of why life is so hard for most people is the centers are disorganized. They're not in harmony with each other. So we tend to think about things that we should be feeling or sensing, or we are feeling or sensing something that we should be thinking about, or we're moving when we ought not to be moving, that the moving becomes a representation of thoughts or energy. I mean, think about nervous movements, for example. Somebody who's, a fiddler or twitcher, that's oftentimes actually thoughts triggering physical movements, and a waste of energy, actually. So anyway, so Gurdjieff basically, I mean, out of many, many aspects of it, let's say these three things. So like the thinking, the feeling or sensing, and the moving as three primary intelligences that are sort of disorganized, or we're not able to necessarily tune into, most people, or we're in one more than the other. So music, and specifically one of the deep things that I continue to learn, but have learned from Robert Fripp in the guitar circle work, which is not a direct lineage of the fourth way, but very much influenced in Robert's work with at the Sherborne House, which was put together by one of Gurdjieff's students, John G. Bennett, and led by his wife after Bennett passed, Elizabeth. Robert studied with there, and then the guitar circle, guitar craft world incorporates some of these themes, specifically thinking, feeling, and moving. So music is a means of connecting all those three things to develop this sense of greater attention or presence in what we're doing. If we think about it, our moving, music is a movement practice. It's necessitated by kinesthetic movements. I'll speak specifically more about a physical instrument. Voice gets a little bit, there's some more intricacies there, but let's just say specifically on a guitar or ukulele, your hands need to move. Now, are we moving our hands from our hands? We're moving our hands from our thinking. Most people tend to learn how to do things from their thinking. Most people in a guitar session are taught to look at things. Looking is very much connected to thoughts. And then, okay, move your finger there, move your finger there, move your finger there, and play that. And oftentimes that doesn't work for a really long time. So if we are going to ask our body to do something, we probably should be in our body. So we probably ought to be present in our body if we are going to move it, and allow the body to move from the body standpoint. One of the reasons most people struggle with chords, besides they're difficult, they're not in their hands. Or strumming a continuous rhythm, they're not in their hands, they're in their thoughts, and it's not creating a flow. So basically, getting present in the body, listening to the sound, which is connected to a feeling. Every note, when we really listen, it generates a feeling, and not necessarily an emotional feeling, but more of a sensation. It's actually a better way to say sensation in the body. If we really listen and a note comes in, we could feel it inside of us. So there's our feeling, and different note combinations create different sound feels, is what I call them. So, just as an example, minor feels sadder or darker, where major feels something else. We're hearing it, we're listening to it, but we actually sense the emotional quality of the sound or the colors of the sound through our feeling or emotional center. And then our thinking, which oftentimes is really busy and disrupted, needs to begin to hone in, just like what you said with TM, with a mantra. So having a process of operation that we're going to do, like let's say we're going to play a single note. So we are in our hand, we are in our body, we're present first because that's necessary, and then we play the note, and then we listen as deep as possible. When our attention is based on the listening, there's not much room for thought. It's just like a mantra. In that context, there really is. And if we notice our thoughts going away, well, we notice that because we tuned out to the sound. So the sound keeps on bringing us back internally. And then what ends up happening is there's a calibration of the internalization of sound that is related to our process of externalizing sound. What would I say? Like, oftentimes when we're learning something, and this goes way beyond music, we're very much in the doing. There's an excitement in the beginning of the process. We just want to play. Our hands are moving. We don't even know they're moving. And that doesn't oftentimes yield harmony, But if we actually begin by receiving, then the note that we receive is going to create us to play another note, basically. So we almost have to go in resistance to this impulse of doing into first being in a receptive state. So this process is basically, which is definitely influenced by the fourth way and my own experiences, is a way of beginning to calibrate our external attention and our internal attention, and beginning to balance them. That part of our attention is on the inside of our body, and part of it is external in the case of sound, for example. And the process of playing a note becomes a biofeedback that our body then begins to move in a way that we want the sound to sound. So if the sound is very sharp and disruptive, we begin to notice that, and we say, okay, obviously I need to make a change in my body. And then the body's intelligence begins to move forward, and then that creates a harmony of those three attentions that we talked about: the thinking, the feeling, sensing, and the moving.
Yeah, I really appreciate what you just said, because as you were speaking, I kind of reflect on my own ukulele learning journey as well. And as someone who is like a life hacker, a student who loves to learn, my whole thing, my whole mind is wired to say faster is better. Right. So therefore, when I learn the different chords or the movement, my thought is, how do I get to be as fast as Josh or Jake Shukamaya-Kudo, right? Like, so I'm trying to learn the patterns as quickly as possible, and actually forgetting the physical sensations each sound chord has in a body. So it's a negative spiral, because now I'm like, it's not getting me the result I'm looking for. Let me go even faster.
Right.
Really, what you just shared is actually did a whole reframe. It's actually more important for me to internalize the physical sensation each note, each chord has on me, deepening that, and from that place of embodiment, then move on to the next note, the next movement, and so on and so on. So
definitely. Yeah. I'm sorry, did you have something else to say?
No.
I'm glad you brought that up, because and we've spoken about this, you and I, before, I think, and also in the classes, but it's the misinterpretation of faster and sooner. And I think differentiating between those things. We generally want things sooner. We want to be able to play something now, soon. So there's sort of this thing, if we do it fast enough, we'll get to that place sooner. Oftentimes the faster actually makes sooner later. And the slower makes sooner. Because
say more about that. So say more specifically about that.
Yeah, well, let's say you build a car so that you can drive 100 miles an hour. So you want to do that today. And so you put it all together, you're missing bolts, the wheels are not aligned, and the whole thing is, is gnarly. And you get in, you start driving, and it's wobbling all over the place. And maybe you don't even get past 10 miles an hour until wheels fall off, or you hit a tree, or, so, but if you said, okay, well, in 10 weeks, I'm going to take time to really make sure everything is there, then perhaps you'll actually build this car that will get you to 100 miles an hour. But if every day you keep on rebuilding the same clunky ass thing, that's the driving that you'll never really get there. And most people will give up because of that. So a lot of it is working with slow cooking, and it's hard for people because we want things now. I mean, and who doesn't? I mean, who doesn't want to be a master in right away? It's just that and part of the reason why I work so much with helping people find their internal tempo and beginning to slow it down internally using music is because that actually develops a larger experience of the present moment, which there's more patience found in that. There's less patience found in the contracted moments. And when our moment is so contracted, which we actually create by speeding up our brain and our nervous system, then we're inherently less patient, and we inherently tend to do the wrong things to actually get the thing, or the things that make it less likely to happen is a better reframe, versus then really expanding out. And it's like if you had a well of water and you had to empty it one drop at a time, I mean, it's a daunting task. But we know logically, well, the only way to do it is just by doing it one drop at a time. No, there aren't any buckets. There's, and you could spend a year devising a way of doing it faster, perhaps. Oh, if only we had this and, this and that and that and that and that. But meanwhile, maybe the person who is just going one drop at a time actually gets the thing done. So I don't know if that helps at all.
Yeah, it really does. The only way to get better is by playing, right? And then there's no really shortcut, I guess. But so in my mind, I'm kind of conflicted because I want to ask you. So, and they 100% agree with you. In order to be better at any kind of craft, any kind of mastery, the path to mastery is practice.
Yes.
However, right. So here's the second.
Well, there is howevers. Yeah.
Right. So then, however, there are also knowing what you know now as a master of your craft, right? Of teaching, of guitar, of mysticism. There's also 80-20 principles, right? What is the 20 atomic unit skills, fundamental skills to master to make the path a little bit simpler, a little bit easier?
Totally. So I would say, I would agree that there are no shortcuts. There are definitely long cuts. So if we can mitigate the long cuts, then maybe we have something that approximates a shortcut, The 80-20, the is internal alignment, really. So if you are trying to move your hands left and right even, and you're not in your hands, they're not going to sync up because we're trying to use our head. So quite literally, the internal alignment as the primary thing to learn then opens up the path in a much greater way because we're our pipes are clean, to use the callback to the reference before. A clear mind or a focused mind, which is hard. So we use the practices to actually learn that thing. If we are practicing 8 hours a day, but the mind is distracted, or we're outside of our capability, so we're just hitting this rather than, which oftentimes comes from, more of an egoic striving, then that's a lot of energy expended, just like another callback. Cheap fuel becomes expensive in the long term. So basically investing in the development of internal awareness and alignment and connected to the sound, auditory listening, all of the things that, like that I've been sharing, and especially in the courses or my one-on-one sessions, end up creating the inner architecture for music to come through, basically. And so like it's basically it's how you're practicing even more than what or how much. I'm seeing amazing results, and it's really like, I mean, not to sound immodest, because I like, as I'm continuing to develop this way of teaching, I feel like a student as well. Like it feels like I'm on a path of discovery, and it's not about me. It's like discovering a process. I have some students who haven't practiced that much on a daily basis or weekly basis. Weeks will go by. I'll meet. There's one in particular, and she'll be like, "Yeah, I didn't actually touch my guitar this week." Now, when I was 17 and teaching, I would have busted her balls about it. Now my approach is, okay, here we are, new now. Let's not be in a shame story around it. Let's not feel bad about what didn't happen the past week. Let's engage right now. And her breakthroughs lately, it's been mind-blowing. It's just beginning to connect for her, and she's stuck with it. So she played the long game. She wasn't practicing hours a day or even daily, but by continuing to work on the inner attention and clearing all that like negative self-response around it, it's happening. And the music begins to take over. And then that's really the special gift. Like, that's what I've learned, is the music begins to teach you. And when that happens, then it becomes exciting. Because then these things begin to open up, and then you want to learn more. There's that, like really positive feedback that you get from the experience of flow, and making sounds that sound good to you, and having the accomplishment of breaking through some of those levels. So there's no shortcuts. There's definitely long cuts. if we were to break it into really simple like things, concepts, and I'm still learning about all of this as well,
Mm-hmm.
but internal alignment, which is necessitated on understanding attention, that's just necessary. If that's not there, it's, you have a clunky ass car, and it's not, you know, and that might be enough for some people, you know, the drunk bar band, and they're playing like, and they're having fun, and hey, you know, like personally, I'm just interested in something a little deeper,
Right.
not to, you know, look at it in a disparaging way, but attention and engagement, and they're kind of connected with each other. If you just continue to engage with the process and continue to develop the internal awarenesses and the attention, and work within a tempo that makes things functional rather than outside of the functionality. If you are trying to do something faster than you're able, you're hitting a wall, and it just does not feel good. So if you continue to work with something that feels nurturing, if the music is even relaxing your nervous system at the same time and teaching you how to do it internally, then you're going to have a much more open space to engage with the process. And over time, all of that alignment and investment, time investment, begins to accrue and give returns, basically. And then it becomes compound interest at that point.
Yeah, you said so many beautiful things, some principles. Guys, definitely go back and listen to what Josh is trying to communicate. So I'll do
me too, I think.
And I mean, what you said is brilliant. There's a lot of layer principles in there. But what actually reminds me is a beautiful quote I came across recently by my spiritual teacher.
I'm sorry, a truck drove by. Who's the quote by?
My spiritual teacher.
Okay.
Yeah. He said, struggle is effort laced with negative emotion. Struggle is effort laced with negative emotion. And in what you're saying is removing the negative emotions, right? Don't put yourself in a negative emotion state.
Yeah.
It actually has a much better efficiency.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
And it can actually, without amplifying any negative emotions as you practice and learn, and that would empower you to continue to do the work and have better throughput in the end. Yes. Right. Yes. Versus having that negative emotion, struggling through it, and at the same time internalize that during the learning process, and then eventually the throughput has that negative emotions all kind of blended in there. So it's a much cleaner throughput when you just don't put yourself in a negative emotional state. Is that an accurate reflection?
100%, you know, and to even deepen it one level, when we're in a learning, when we're in a learning mindset, we're really becoming like a sponge. Something changes. I don't know what's happening at the neurological level, but it's almost like the intention of learning opens up receptivity. So if we are learning while stressed or learning while feeling negative, we're learning that as well, and they're getting welded together internally. So it's almost like when we're in the learning state, it actually is at the utmost important not to have any stress or negative emotions, because we're going to absorb those things more likely because we're in that like open receptive state. And conversely, if we are learning from that, if truly from a relaxed nervous system, a positive mindset, open up to possibility as we're learning, with every note, we're wiring that with the experience. So it's like it begins to like really build upon itself at that point.
Yeah, bring the neural network idea, right? So what you practice regularly essentially reinforces your neural network concept. Yeah. So by having a positive relationship with during the learning process, you're actually driving in, hey, this is a joyful experience. I can do this, and I'm getting better at it, versus, oh my God, this is so hard, or I'm terrible at this. I'm so gifted with Josh. Like, so I'm not reinforcing that, right? Yeah, that's beautiful. A lot of different places we can go from here. We can geek out a little bit more on learning. Is there anything else around sort of learning how to learn? So put yourself in internal alignment, giving your best attention, right? And then engage with the process, and then doing it regularly. And then that will have a compound effect of your learning experience. Anything else that you wanted to share around the learning process?
Yeah, I'm sure there is. It's my mind is going a couple different places. I'm flashing into like
Yeah, you open a lot of different loops, so we can go a lot of different directions. Anywhere your highest intention will take you.
yeah. Well, I think yeah, a couple things. Learning, and this obviously is so obvious, but it's a process, and we'll say those words a lot, But I think when we're in the experience of learning, we forget that, and we are trying to get from A to B, which oftentimes makes B further away, rather than being in the learning. Like just as a quick analogy, in recent classes that I've taught, I'll present something, and every week there's something a little bit stretching the capabilities a bit, gently. And somebody might pop in from the Zoom and be like, well, my fingers, it's not working right now. And my response will be, oh, so after 10 seconds of trying, it's not working. There must be something wrong with your hands. Like there's oftentimes the assumption if we don't get something right away, there's something wrong with us, versus really like getting into this idea of this is an act of discovery, and it takes time. This might be a little bit redundant, but I think just really like helping people to tune into that mindset as a foundation, and continuing to remind oneself about that. Another thing that I've been learning about learning is how important compassion is. How important it is for somebody to hold space in a compassionate way for somebody, because we oftentimes will go into a self degradation. There's something wrong with me. I can't do this, and then it brings up stories. And somebody to really hold a compassionate and loving space, and hold the hand gently, and like, hey, like I use this analogy when I'm teaching. When a baby takes its first steps, it falls after a step or two, or grabs onto the thing. The natural reaction from a loving parent is celebration for the steps, not what's wrong with you. You can't walk yet. How come you can't run? Oh, you fell. You must be bad at walking.
You're such a loser for falling.
Pardon?
So you're such a loser for falling.
Right. All those things. But we do that to ourselves in the learning process.
Yeah.
And that closes off the openness where learning really, really happens. So mindset, like really like compassionate mindset, and helping people install that program in themselves. And this is something I had to learn the hard way. That's been part of my long path to mitigate it from others. I practiced with so much pressure and so much self-beratement that it got the best of me. I mean, obviously now I look at it as part of what I needed to learn, along my process. But I don't think everybody needs to learn that the hard way.
Yeah.
In fact, I think there'd be a lot more joy in music metaphorically and music literally in the world.
Yeah.
If we incorporated this in our learning, whatever the learning is.
Yeah. So let's actually talk about teachers, the importance of having the right teacher, because you had briefly mentioned about a space of compassion. I remember a time where I finally was curious enough about music and have the courage to actually start to play the drum or whatever. And I was, being around someone who was technically very, very good, but she would just basically beat me up for not being perfect. That basically doused my enthusiasm, curiosity, and just even any kind of positive emotions around music. I'm like, fuck it. You do your thing. Thank you. I'm gonna. So it wasn't until I came across, because I was looking for a teacher, and who actually not just have the technicality aspect of it, but also the mindset, and also someone who can have that space of compassion and teach the mentality of the metacognition aspect of it, right?
Yeah.
A la you. So I so appreciate the fact that you allow me to like, hey, this isn't technical. It is, but it's not. Let's start off with your fundamental relationship with sound.
Yeah.
And pay attention to how you hold it, how you breathe, and all of that stuff, right? So thank you. Anything else you want to say about finding the right teacher? What makes a great teacher? What makes a terrible teacher? Go ahead.
Yeah. The easy questions. I love it. And I just want to say, I'm really enjoying this conversation. So thank you. Thank you for the invitation. What makes a great teacher? Just some of the things that come to mind, obviously patience, encouragement. People oftentimes will comment on how patient I am in my sessions. I'll actually, when I began teaching, like a lot, when I was 16, I was teaching about 40 people a week privately. One of the things I loved about it is I had all of this patience, and I was not a patient 16-year-old boy, like most aren't. But
Wait,
something,
so quick introduction. So
yeah,
you yourself weren't patient, but you had infinite patience for your students.
yeah.
Say a little bit more about that, because I mean, again, making it personal, I'm, as you probably experienced me already, not very patient by nature. So
I don't
say
know,
a
but
bit more about the dichotomy of the two.
yeah, I mean, just as a reflection, I never experienced you impatient. I experienced you enthusiastic about accumulating what you're doing, which I think is a different experience. Um, it was remarkable. I mean, on reflection, I didn't understand it at the time. I knew it just felt good. I knew it felt good that I entered this practice room with somebody. And I mean, not to say I was a saint or a perfect person at the time, but there was this patience that became available, like this kind of like superpower. And it felt good for me, to like be in that state. And it's something that I guess, encouraged me to teach more. So I think patience is a really important thing. And I think patience happens naturally. It's not something that I have to like try to do with somebody. Like when we're learning,
Mm,
um, it's the natural outcome of compassion. I feel
mm,
I when I'm in a lesson with somebody, I want them to do well. I don't have an expectation of them doing well per se, right away or learning the thing. Oftentimes people will apologize when they make a mistake. And I bring that up, like, why are you apologizing to me? Like you're not letting me down.
mm,
Like we're in the process of learning. So I think patience is the outcome of compassion,
mm,
and also the regulated nervous state, the nervous system. I mean, if my nervous system is off, if I drink 8 cups of coffee and a couple of Adderall, like my moments then become so compressed that chances are, because my tempo has changed.
yeah,
Patience is directly connected to tempo. The more spacious I am,
yeah,
the
yeah.
more I have space to hold. So what makes a great teacher? I think compassion and then the natural outcome of patience.
Mm,
Acuity to figure out what that person needs in that moment. I don't think there's a systematic approach for everybody. I think there's principles that we can use, but we all need different medicine and different things. So I think having the ability to assess, almost like a psychotherapist in a way, of where are blind spots, and how to offer the things that help the person do that. I've been learning a lot, giving them space to learn and experience. So what makes a great teacher? That as well, like leading the student to an experience, but not giving it to them.
mm,
Teaching, like guiding them to discover it for themselves. Sure, I can tell you where all those notes are, but I want you to find them. And if you make a mistake, I might not tell you right away to see if you recognize it yourself. Now, if you made that mistake 2 or 3 times, then maybe it's time to bring it to your attention.
mm,
But I'd rather have you recognize it on your behalf, because that's how development truly becomes
mm,
developed. So I think leading and guiding the student to an experience, obviously positive support, and is super important. And I think not everybody is meant to teach. Also, I think everybody could probably develop their teaching ability, and maybe that's segueing into what makes a not great teacher in a sense, would probably be the opposite of all those types of things. Um, there's an interesting moment I think that's happening with our culture, and it's something I saw some years ago that I saw as a trend, and now it's beginning to happen, which is so many people are out there teaching things, especially in the entrepreneurial space and the coaching world, and sort of like all of a sudden everybody's a teacher. These Facebook posts, that so many people make, it's like it feels kind of preachy, kind of teachy, kind of like coachy type of thing, and a lot of it feels pretty cookie cutter and just replicas of a thing, that other people have done. I think and I feel passionate about that. If we all have something to offer each other, and I think teaching, whether it's at a financial level or just an exchange of giving a positive benefit to humanity, is one of the most beautiful things, if not the most beautiful thing that there is. Because if you could help somebody learn something, especially something that's relevant and useful, you're empowering them to such a degree. I mean, it changes lives, depending on what they're learning, really. So, so many people are taking the teaching position, but I don't know if it's always coming from a higher mission, or if it's almost like teaching becomes a means to an end for them. I'm seeing this a lot in the coaching world. Like, so many coaching programs I'm seeing, and in the testimonials, I made this much money in a month. I acquired 12 clients in a month. And it seems like all these programs, or many of them, are about acquiring clients or money, and not like, well, are you truly serving people though? Like, are you in check with yourself, with your patience, with your compassion, with your true motivations, and to really be in a supportive role? Basically, I think a really great teacher is a guide. That I've been somewhere, and here, I'm going to show you how to get there, but you may need to get there in a way different way than I got there. So I'm going to be attuned to what you need in that path. Like, I had a teacher in college who was a real hard ass, and I sought him out. He was a ball buster, and I wanted that. I also, at the same time,
you were looking for a ball, busting session with your.
Yeah, for sure, because my aspirations were very high level, and I wanted somebody who's just going to really go in and find those things. For me, music at that time served a different function than what I'm offering right now for people. Like, it was my life depended on it. So I was looking to be as amazing as possible. And yeah, and sometimes his ball busting helped, and sometimes it didn't, quite honestly. And I had enough in like self-esteem where I always understood it as something that was supportive. But I sought it out. I think that's the most important things. And I'll say this: when I graduated from college and I began teaching college, literally right after I graduated, I took on that ball busting approach for a number of students, and it didn't work out well. And it was
what they needed at the time.
Pardon?
It wasn't what they needed at the time.
It wasn't what they needed, and I was approaching them with a way that I just thought was, this is how you learn, and this is what you need, and you need to learn all this shit in a week, and if you don't, then I'm gonna bust your ass about it. Mm-hmm. And it actually, I was showing some student some more difficult chord voicings that take a certain level of dexterity in the hand developed. This is at the college level, and just these different like really kind of more elaborate fingers. And his hand got a little hurt. Not severely, but I think he was stretching too hard. Mm-hmm. And when another teacher told me that, he's like, "Yeah, his hands kind of," and it was this teacher, somebody who I really respected, actually a mentor of mine, who was basically saying, "Hey, dude, I think you're going about this a little bit intense.
Chill out."
Yeah. So that was a moment of humility for me, and kind of checking my own thing of like, oh, okay, like I need to be more in tune with the process. So I think I don't know how much makes a bad teacher. Well, okay, I'll give one example of a bad teacher I've had. I think I could look at one in particular.
Well, hold on. Before you go to the bad teacher part, let me do a quick recap of what you said.
Sure.
So that would give you a little break, as well as for people who are listening, the quality, the attributes of a good teacher. Okay. So what you said, desire for them to do well.
Yeah.
At the same time, don't expect them to do well. Right. Very different.
Or expect them to make instant progress. How about that? Like,
yes. Right. Yeah. Don't have that burden of like, hey, you should blah, blah, blah. Right. Yeah. Intention for them to do well, but don't have the expectation per se. Right.
Yeah.
And then self-regulate your nervous system, so that way you come from a calm space versus having 10 Adderalls and speed up your internal clock.
Yeah.
Have enough acuity, sensibility to meet them where they're at, know what they need, and then from your tool belt and give it to them what they need. They may need a little bit of a tough love. They may need some encouragement, right? So depending on what they need, give them that. Nudge them, but don't give them what they need. Don't necessarily point out, and just listen for, like, hey, if there's a pattern, then you give it to them, but not right away, give them exactly what they need at the time. And also give them lots of positive support per se. Cool. So some follow-up question there before you go to the bad teacher part.
Yeah, for sure.
Some people believe, especially the high performers listening, positive support, it makes people soft. And I'm just saying, this is not my point of view, but one person particularly comes to mind. No positive support. What's your take on that?
I mean, if that's what that person needs, then that's what if that what makes them function and feel good, then sure. I would say the majority do really well with positive support.
Okay, cool. I agree 100%. It's one of those, it's what people may or may not need at the time. So
yeah.
All right, beautiful. Let's move to the not so good teachers, the bad teachers, the terrible teachers that you still remember even today. It made an impression on you. What are some of the qualities and the attributes that you remember?
Yeah. And I mean, really, thankfully, I could only think of one that really stands out. Like if I racked my brain, I could probably think of a handful of mediocre teachers, but I really do feel blessed that I've had good teachers along the way. One teacher. So I'm in college, and she taught a voice class for instrumentalists, and this is at Berklee in Boston. So basically, this class was, as it sounds, it was a vocal class for people who are not singers, and she was just not a very happy person. Now, I've had other teachers who aren't happy, I mean, and myself included. But I think there's sometimes like the unhappiness can come out, and I think for her, part of it was the this is my own projection or sense of it. She wasn't happy with her position in life or in the class. I'll say this: if you're teaching a voice class for instrumentalists, you're not one of the top voice teachers at the school.
Cool. I like it.
You probably should have the top vocal teacher at the school teach that class. That would actually make the most sense. Mm-hmm. But just in the way of the bureaucracy of the school or that I went to, the top teachers taught the top students.
Yeah.
And as a guitar teacher, I was blessed enough to study with the top teachers. So I had that experience of really working with the higher echelon teachers. So anyway, so I'm in this class, and she criticized other singers, called Sting stink, for example. And to me, that it just like that's pretty much even all I need to say was why, like why not recognize greatness rather than put down, not to mention, if you're teaching a voice class for instrumentalists at a college and you're putting down somebody who's a world-class artist, it's like, maybe you should check that.
Yeah, actually, it's more of a reflection on her bitterness than on Sting.
100%. All of it was a reflection on her. I remember she told me specifically. I think she even said, I don't think I made this up, but she's like, sometimes I like you, Josh, and sometimes I really hate you. And because I challenged her in class, I challenged her, and she didn't like it. She told me, and this probably makes her a great teacher, but in kind of like in a inverse type of way.
Anti-example, yeah.
Yeah. She told me, because I had a lower singing voice, and now I'll say this to her benefit. She was right to encourage me to develop my higher register. I would agree with that now. At that time, I was more into stylized music. I wasn't so. In my lower voice, I was into Tom Waits, Frank Zappa, like singers who had lower voices, Leonard Cohen. And she told me something of the fact that almost to verbatim. This is some years back, but basically, well, it's, oh God, let me see if I can remember it exactly. Something about like, you need to do what's right, and what's right is what most people like.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah. In my, thankfully I was, like wise enough at that age to be like, oh, wow, this person knows nothing about what people like. Because first of all, like all of the artists that I loved were not mainstream, like, so I suppose in this in particular case, her own blind spot, her own blind spots leading the way she taught is making her a bad teacher. So I suppose, and thankfully I don't have that much reference to what bad teachers are, but I think if blind spots are leading, if there's an insensitivity to the student, if there's degradation, if there's, like, and oftentimes that's coming from their own egoic blind spots, it's making a bad teacher, and I don't know how much more is. It's probably better just to focus on what makes a good one, but
Yeah. One thing, so number one, I really so appreciate embodying a great teacher. And that's why I chose you as my ukulele teacher, right? It's something that I don't ever foresee myself doing it professionally. It's more of an exploration of this awareness that you spoke of, this embodiment that you spoke of, this relationship with sound that you spoke of. So thank you for embodying that. I appreciate it.
Sure.
Yeah. So let's actually talk a little bit more around, let's see, there's a lot of different things. I want to actually ask you one specific thing. I mean, this may be a segue to more of our overarching philosophy. You had talked publicly about how your journey of deepening your own craft as a musician with ayahuasca as an example, right? So we'll touch on just the learning aspect of it before we go into more ceremonial and all this symbolism that goes with that. So talk about how using ayahuasca as a way to help deepening your relationship with sound with your instrument just a bit before we segue to another topic.
Yeah, for sure. And so for those who aren't aware what ayahuasca is, right, it's a shamanistic tea that it comes from the Amazon jungle. That's a blend of DMT, basically, which is a molecule that is inside of our body. And I don't know if it's scientifically proven, but there's suspicion to say that it's released when we dream and when we die and when we're born. So it's a psychedelic experience that comes from plants and is gaining a lot of both anecdotal and scientific proof, evidence of being very medicinal for certain people at certain times in their life. And they found that it can heal or at least assist in diminishing depression, trauma, addiction. So just to educate for a moment, to differentiate it from a drug, that has a certain connotation. It is a healing plant, or at least it can be. Everything can also have its negative effects as well. And it came into my life specifically that I guess I incorporated it in my life to help work with my own personal depression. And that moved also into playing music for ayahuasca ceremonies. And music and sound is very much a big part of the ceremony. So for those who might not have had any psychedelic experience, one of the things about psychedelics is senses can seem to open, basically. So colors can be experienced brighter, sounds deeper, more acute touch feeling. It can increase that, which can be a lot for people, which I think is also why I don't have a sort of a blanket, yes, go do, ayahuasca or eat mushrooms or all these types of things, because it's not for everybody. And it's definitely something that, whatever about that.
Before we move on, one quick, so we do talk about ayahuasca quite a lot on this podcast.
Okay.
Thank you for that education and a little primer. The way I share that on the podcast is think of it as a catalyst, right? It actually amplifies what you already are. So imagine the fuel tank, the fuel that have you in different fuel tanks, it actually amplify even more. If you tend to use anger or resentment, that gets amplified during the experience as well. So, it's for the people who may not have a stable fuel tanks, this probably is not for them, right? But for those who are pretty fit physically, emotionally, right, spiritually, and mentally, and this is something that it's a great experience, catalytic experience to go through. So
Yeah, it can be for some, even people who are stabilized, they might be good in their stability and they might not need to but yes, yeah.
So moving on, go ahead.
Yeah, moving on. So my experience of it with sound and music, and there's something about that plant in particular and the experience of being with it that sure seems connected to sound and music and my personal experience. It helped me hear sound better in a way and hear it in a deeper way. And in playing for ceremonies or during ceremonies, well, it's a beautiful challenge because I'm in that time I'm also drinking the medicine, so I'm under the experience, I'm with the experience, which can make certain things more difficult. So there was sort of this internal challenge of perhaps like walking on a tightrope over a mountain, and that it made it a little bit more difficult, but that difficulty also helped me stay focused and centered in a way that actually like kind of worked out an internal muscle. And then at some point it just becomes aligned. So it was a really beautiful experience, one, to use music as a means of service in that role, to play certain sounds and songs that I felt people needed in that room to support their journey. For many people, the experience can be very intense. I know you've talked about it before, but if somebody isn't familiar with it, mostly they say, "Oh, is that the thing that you throw up on?" Yeah, and some people do. Many do, and it can be uncomfortable in the body, and you can encounter difficult things. So, sort of using music as a means to nurture and move energy. Those experiences taught me deeper how that works, how different notes and scales and things interact with the moments. I feel like I began that exploration playing music for yoga classes, and then kind of in the more ritual ceremonial standpoint specifically with ayahuasca, it kind of elucidated that deeper in a way. So there was both my internal connection to sound and finding the channel, and basically beautiful thing. I learned a lot. I learned when I played a song in a ceremony that felt like, oh, I want to play this now, from more of the doing. Oftentimes it just wouldn't feel right for the room. When I learned to listen to the room and kind of just get a sense of what came through, magic oftentimes happened. So I think it taught me how to listen deeper to what really feels like, what is the music of the moment versus what do I want to play, and allow the expression to that. It also helped me come into deeper connection with my voice. And as a singer,
you sing in ceremony while you play. Wow.
Yes. Yeah. And there's something, again, that in my own experience about that specific medicine, it kind of like, because I've had difficulty singing in my life. It's actually been a pain point in my musical existence, that I could hear my voice and feel it better than normal. And that allowed me to be in more acuity with pitch and control. Like and the best that I could say, I would love to know what happens at the neurological level, what it's catalyzing, but it sure seems to enhance an internal connection to sound awareness that feels aligned. And perhaps just a couple of my own sense, especially with studying Dr. Tomatis, which gets into a whole nother podcast probably. But one of the things Dr. Tomatis, he developed something called the Tomatis method, which was a way to train the ear and quite literally the muscles within the ear to hear certain frequencies. He recognized that people who have certain things, difficulty hearing or singing, that it actually is an inner ear muscle that hasn't been developed, and as well as that they're not listening in a right ear dominant way. Because
Wow.
yeah, it's a whole thing.
You just blew my mind. I didn't know that was possible until you just mentioned it.
It's really profound work, and it's actually something that I feel has been underutilized in society. Sort of like if we didn't know people needed glasses or glasses existed, that there's actually like a mechanism within the ear, and that the ear needs to learn how to listen. And part of it is these muscles, and also part of it is being right ear dominant. That oftentimes people who have pitch recognition difficulty, they can have this inner ear muscle is not quite developed, as well as not a defined right ear dominant listening ear. And one of the things that in my own personal experience with Aya, I would really feel both hemispheres of my brain kind of like zero into a center point, which is where I experienced the sound and the voice. And when I was aligned and attuned with that, it sure felt a whole lot easier to sing. So it put me in touch with, I think, a deeper internal experience of sound and music would be the shortest answer.
So let me just make a comment, and I'll drill in more on the specific sounds. I don't have the research to back it up right now. I'll do my best to find it in the show notes. That our default network gets turned down. Our filters gets turned down. So that allows us to have more a cleaner pipe, shall we say? The filters turn off. So that way, we can experience things more. Experience our internal states and emotions, our thoughts, and that's also possibly why we experience synesthesia more. During ceremonies like that as well. Yeah. So on the learning part of it, so you experience this. Well, number one, let me just make a comment.
Please.
So impressed of the musicians that can do really intricate movements and with their voice during ceremony. Imagine, for those of you who haven't experienced something like this, imagine you just had a really difficult workout, right? That level of internal intensity, you're kind of out of breath. You're trying to like hold yourself together, like that internal intensity. So now imagine somebody gives you a guitar or ask you to sing with that intensity in mind. That's, in my mind, what I envision to be a ceremonial instrumentalist, while you're on the medicine. Is that an accurate, on par analogy?
Yeah, something like that. I think it necessitates a development of internal management of energy and all that, and even maybe how to channel it with it. If I didn't have the level of technical acuity already developed, I think it'd be much more difficult.
Yeah.
So I do have the benefit of coming in with X amount of years of development in the hands. So even it might make it a little bit more challenging in a certain degree, but I can trust my hands to get there, basically. So I'm not having to figure things out while I'm doing it.
Right. Someone like me who's a beginner ukulele player, we're like, there's no way I'm playing the ukulele.
I would disagree.
Oh, you disagree? Interesting. Okay.
Let's say you and I had like a couple sessions of like, okay, like here's what you're going to be playing music in a ceremony. And we had a couple sessions specifically directed towards that. I would orient you on what you could do and how to do it. And I bet it would be beautiful.
Okay. Hey, challenge accepted, dude. Yeah. That's awesome. I love that.
It might be 3 notes.
I would love that. Yeah. Let's talk offline about that.
For sure.
So bring it back to the whole idea of deepening your relationship with sound with catalysts like ayahuasca. So you said it opens up your receptivity, and as well as this, left brain, right brain hemisphere, integration to allow you to get into the notes even more.
Yeah.
How does that accelerate the learning process with your relationship with the sounds, with the instruments at all, if any?
Me personally, or like in a more general way?
You personally.
I think it accelerated it in a way of further refining my understanding of attention and how to work with it. becoming more aware of when the mind is drifting into other things and how to continually, stay in that meditative, centered, attentive way, and aligned way. Yeah, I think that's the primary thing.
Okay. So it doesn't necessarily accelerate or decelerate. It basically gives you more of a internal stressful situation for you to basically hold your ground more under stress while performing at a high level. Is that
Yeah.
a
Well,
fun?
yeah, that's one aspect. And I think having also just having the reflection and maybe we're saying the same things from a different angle, perhaps, but like having the observation, like at least in my experience with II, there's sort of another level of the observer consciousness that I feel connected with, so that I can understand the processes that I'm doing in a different way, and then basically begin to work with that. Sort of like, I'm not a golfer, but if you went to a golf pro and they look at your swing and they help you basically make the adjustments, or you watch yourself on video to make that adjustment, something of an internal awareness of that, like a little bit more aware of what is happening under the hood, basically.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, go ahead.
Yeah. And well, go ahead, please.
One analogy that I also share on this podcast a lot is, in the beginning, before I had my personal experience, I thought this catalyst, like ayahuasca, would be an escape from reality. And I haven't had many ceremonies afterwards. I realized this is actually for me to get into hyper reality. It lifts the veil for me to, as you said, look under the hood of what's actually happening in reality, in my mind, in my body, in my heart, and then also the external reality as well. That's the way I articulate it.
How would you define hyper reality?
Just basically lift the veil, like remove the illusions that I have and just actually see things as they are, and then see things from different perspectives versus, having more of a filter and trying to discern,
and
filter.
So here's a question with that, because I do think this is, and I'm not saying this with you in particular, but a potential shadow side of medicine work. How do we know we're in a hyper reality and not just another filter that we are perceiving as a hyper reality, sort of this inception like experience that, like now we're awake? Because I do think one of that I've actually seen a negative consequence of in particular ayahuasca, people can get into a belief pattern that might be out of touch with reality, whatever reality it might even be. I think, I think it's like, what's the subjective and objective reality?
Yeah.
So just sort of a question of like, how do you personally discern what is a hyper reality or not just another filter?
Totally. Great question. I love that you asked that question. And let's see the best I can answer it. So let's first of all look at objective reality versus subjective reality. Right? Murray Hidary, another beautiful musician. He is the founder of Mind Travel. He was one of the guests as well. So his whole thing is, it's consensus reality versus subjective reality, right? Okay. An experience of one versus, there's some consensus about what is it that we're looking at. And your question was, how do I know if it's hyper reality versus just another filter that my mind makes up? I think ultimately it comes down to, I think that question to me is ultimately not that relevant. Ultimately for me, it's a question of narrative, right? Do I have a narrative that empowers me to live the life that I want to live? In other words, when I have this narrative, do I feel contracted or do I feel expanded? If I have this narrative and I feel expanded, that to me is a new reality that actually empowers me. Ultimately, that's what I care about, right? Sort of the effect rather than, asking the validity of, this lens. Does that make sense? Can you give it back to me what you heard?
Yeah, no, that does make sense. Before I give it back to you, I think you are a special circumstance because you are in touch and connected. There's a steady foundation within you that is steady, and what about the, let's say, person who might lean towards a more psychotic or schizophrenic break, where their new reality feels very empowering and expansive, but it has a negative consequence on their life or other people's lives? Like they might buy into it to such a degree that they could actually cause harm. Um, like what would you, how would you say, like for another person who might not be so assured of themselves, how to potentially differentiate that?
Yeah. So now we're coming to the question of sovereignty, right?
Of what?
Sovereignty,
Uh-huh.
right? I think ultimately, this is my personal belief that people choose to live the life that they want to live. And if they live the life that they want to live in a way that actually empowers them, then who am I to say, hey, that's not the right way to live, so
Sure.
to speak. So that's the way so ultimately for them, it's more of a self-discernment of, is it actually empowering me, or is it disempowering me? So if I recognize, hey, my mind's really fragile, I'm in a psychosis state, then perhaps it's out of my own volition to not even touch, a powerful catalyst like an ayahuasca or whatever, or breath work, or even, vipassana or things like that.
Yeah. Do you remember when this is some years back, like when there was that transformational coach person who led that sweat lodge and like a couple of people died? It was like warrior training.
Okay, I didn't know that.
Yeah, this was probably back in like 2009-ish, But here was a character like who was doing transformational work and I'm sure felt very empowered in doing it and encouraged people to stay in an environment that ultimately killed a number of people, actually. It's, and I know I'm not asking you this question, but I guess this is just something that like has been rattling in my brain for a bit, in more extreme versions of transformational work, such as medicine work, such as, like harder push to the limit, whether that's physical, mental, emotional.
Gagan running the deserts.
Well, now he does it for himself, right?
Well, he also has those like ultra marathon type things where there's a lot of physical risk, right?
Yes, but I guess what I'm saying is I'm looking at more like people who basically do something, feel empowered as a facilitator, perhaps. And that empowerment might be not fully cooked and potentially have negative consequences on another person.
I actually don't see the difference between, let's say, a desert ultra marathon versus, because in that there's still a container, someone who is ultimately held responsible. There's a design for that, right? And then the person who participates in it, sure, one is a little bit more intimate, one is more, bigger, greater environment. So, ultimately, excellent question. Certainly, I'm not sure we can come up with the answer on our podcast conversations right now, like who ultimately is responsible. I think both, right? There's the sovereign self making a powerful choice, and then also the event producer who do everything that they can to articulate possible risk, and here's the preparation, da 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 da, and ultimately knowing that there's a waiver, right? You come in knowing that there's a risk of sorts, mentally, physically, and so forth.
Yeah, I think like, we could probably move into another thing, but like what I'm talking about is how is bringing up a shadow side that can create confusion in people that they think is real, and they follow that confusion, and it actually makes their life worse and can potentially impact other people. And I'm not saying this is you by any means. In fact, I'd say you're the opposite of that. But just sort of like, I think it is a conversation that needs to be addressed in when we begin to talk about things that do change our perception of reality, whatever reality might be. There is a risk of people being confusing empowerment with another belief pattern, which, if that, like I've seen it hinder people's lives. I've seen people take on a leadership role from a confused place, and now in the leadership role, in their belief, messing up other people's lives under it, basically. So it's sort of like, I don't think there's an answer we're trying to get to, but just sort of like there, I think, and I've had to do this with myself, if we bring it back to our conversation, be very, very, like I had to be very clear and discerning and continue to question, am I having what I would say is an objective experience or subjective experience? I think music is a great teacher, if we'll segue it back, that two notes that are in tune, there's an objective reality to it.
Mm-hmm.
Not everybody hears that.
Mm-hmm.
Not everybody hears out of tune. So there is a sort of gap in their awareness that can be tuned to begin to perceive of what is objective and what is subjective. In doing so, I think it reveals how much of almost everything we're doing is subjective. And observing that then actually can create another form of transformation. I would say that music itself, outside of medicine, is a very safe and contained way to find that.
I agreed 100%. And I really appreciate this discussion. It's something certainly that I wish I have a more, here's a framework step by step, a very crisp answer. But I think that kind of misses the point, right? Because the whole point of this podcast conversation is an inquiry of not only within the boundary of our mastery, but also kind of at the brink and perhaps beyond. Like, what does that mean? What does it look like, right? As space holders, as master teachers, how do we actually ensure that people choose in a empowered state?
Yes.
Right? This actually helps them, supports them towards the life they want to create, rather than takes away and robs them from their own sovereignty.
Yes.
So to your point, bring back to music, to your point about, so there was a question here about, are there specific notes or note combinations that actually would predictably get people to a certain emotional state? Could you maybe talk about that or demonstrate that a bit, so that way people can have an idea of, now that you have a really deep understanding of notes and music and sound, you share with us maybe some examples?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great question. So I think, one way to begin to orient around it is thinking about music that appears in film. If anybody's had the opportunity to watch a film, or at least a part of a film that was stripped of the musical soundtrack, especially in an intense scene, a chase scene or a really dramatic scene, you'll notice something. It feels awkward. It doesn't feel right. A big part of what music does in film, in fact, I would say the thing it does is actually helps resonate and create emotional responses to the experience, to sort of heighten and almost like triggers the emotional response to meet the acting, and it all blends together in a certain way. So we can understand that certain aspects of music have an effect on our internal experience of what we're feeling. It spans way beyond just the emotional, but it's something even deeper. In fact, I was part of this talk a couple of days ago that said, yeah, we could say that music creates emotion in the body, or we experience it as emotion, but really it is what it is. And that's part of what makes music so beautiful. So we could kind of begin to use words to certain sounds to approximate what it's doing within us, but it never really quite gets there. What does get there is the pure direct experience of it. But having said that, understanding with words and beginning to organize it does help us attune to this. So what I will say is that in music, how many different notes are there? Do you know the answer, CK, or would you guess in the whole universe of music?
Dude. Random guess, 12?
Yeah. I mean, that's actually an informed guess, and we could even say yes, that is in our Western musical world, we have 12 distinct notes. Another way we could even look at notes is a frequency. So we could say this is A440. We've heard that. We've probably heard A432 and all the stuff that goes with that. But basically what that means is this note here is vibrating. The string in this case is vibrating at 440 times exactly per second. So it's an objective thing. And So there's 12 distinct notes that we categorize, and then there's octave of those notes. So that would be this note, which we would call an A, which is right now vibrating at 440 times a second. This is another A, but now vibrating at half of that at 220 a second. This is vibrating at 110. If we went down the other octave, which the guitar doesn't have, it'd be 55. If we went down another one, it'd be 27.5, 13.75, and so on until we, just kept on reducing basically to infinity. And conversely, doubling it. So 440, there it is, 880. The next one would be 1660 or 1760. Yeah, and so on. So it's interesting because there's an infinite amount of replications of this note, quite literally a fractalization of frequency, with 12 distinct resonant notes. One might say, well, what about here's one note, here's another note. How many notes are in between those? Now, on a piano, the answer is technically 0, but conceptually infinite. So between this note and this note, you have all these little micro notes that are quite literally sort of like if you were measuring a space of a foot, you could divide that into 12 inches. But in between every point, you could divide quite literally into an infinite, although we don't perceive of all of that level of acuity. So the short answer is there's an infinite amount of frequencies, but we organize them in our Western world into 12 individual notes. Every one of those 12 individual notes inherently, and one might argue this if they have a maybe perfect pitch, but individual notes, there's not so much of an emotional quality or relationship to. So if I play this note, or if I play this note, individually, this frequency or this frequency doesn't really call to much of an experience individually. When we combine the notes, though, so let's just say this note and let's say this note. Now together, now there's something that we could begin to qualify internally. And we can use a binary basically that ends up being a gradient of a binary, but harmonious or stable to dissonant or unstable. So we would, if we were to qualify these two notes, we could say those are very stable. They work really well together. In contrast, if I moved one of those notes, I guess you can't see my fingers, but here, we would call that dissonant unstable. So that's just sort of like a good compare and contrast. So the emotional response or the internal response is primarily based with stability or instability in the gradient between those and all the little flavors that exist between that. Depends on how deep we want to go with like how this is. I'll just give the brief version of it. When we're hearing sound, it's the vibrations of the strings are creating wavelengths in the molecules that are a replica or a continuation even of the string vibrating. That's meeting our skin, our ears, the cilia, the hairs in the ears, vibrating those in the same wave pattern, which is then goes into the liquid in our ears, which then goes into electronical signal, all still vibrating at the same pattern in our nervous system and God knows what else, neural networks and all the types of things. So the point of that is notes vibrating together create a shape. And some shapes are more symmetrical, which we experience as balanced, and some shapes are more asymmetrical, which we experience as dissonance. And our internal vibrations or nervous system response or neural networks are vibrating in that same relationship. So basically it's an analog or a continuation of that. So we're literally feeling these vibrations, which changes our internal state. So if we are hearing or listening notes or combinations, such as this, that in music, we call this a perfect fifth. We don't need to get into the technicalities, but we could call that a perfect fifth. This is a very stable relationship. There's two stable relationships primarily. Let's say the octave, which is the doubling of the notes, which is basically just a fractal or a replica. And then the first one that's differentiated would be this perfect fifth, which is very stable. So in listening to these notes together, it is beginning to stabilize our internal sense, because literally that vibrational pattern is we're eating in a way. We're, and conversely, if we partake in this dissonance enough, it's destabilizing our system. So different note relationships have that effect on us. The ability that we're able to be really present with it is how we can feel it deeper. So let's say like the person who's not necessarily very musically attuned, maybe they hear it, they like it, but there's even people that can kind of like, yeah, I can give or take music. Chances are they're not really experiencing what this is doing. They're hearing it, but they're not really experiencing it. Versus the trained musician, let's say, learns to hear and feel this so deeply that they have such a connection to it that they're inside, And I think like when we see musicians and we get intoxicated by it, part of it, I think, is how deep they are internally. They're going somewhere and they're expressing, but they're not externally oriented. They're so deep inside. And what I found personally is where they are inside, or where we are, is in the experience of these notes, which have so much to tell us the deeper that we listen to it. So basically, different note combinations have that effect on us. And part of what I would say is like kind of painting with sound as a musician, or, helping create a different emotional internal atmosphere, is playing around with those colors in a way that that aligns us to some of those notes. I call this tuning into harmony. And we could even just kind of metaphorically say, oftentimes, maybe a lot of us, especially if we're eating a lot of dissonant things, whether that's food or news or, whatever it is, begin to get tuned, that life sort of seems like the music of their life kind of feels like this. Or it feels, maybe really sharp, like very fast. And
yeah, I just had a nervous reaction.
Yes.
Receiving these sounds. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's what it's doing. It's literally stimulating your nervous system in response. So quite literally, using sound, the notes that help us tune into harmony, into balance, at a tempo that helps our nervous system relax, because faster tempos are more heightened alert sense. Like a panic attack is a very fast internal tempo. If a tiger all of a sudden enters the room, chances are our nervous system will be like, okay, let's chill. So there's a utility to a very fast, heightened nervous system. It's very expensive energetically. And, so basically beginning to work at slower tempos helps reset the brain waves in the nervous system to a place of homeostasis and relaxation, which kind of tells our whole system, it's like, oh, it's okay. It's okay right now. Versus, which says it's not okay right now. Now there's faster, more dissonant music that people love because they might love that feeling of being on edge. And I wouldn't say there's anything wrong with it. I would look at it from a bit of a medical standpoint and say, is that really serving you?
Yeah.
And you might want to use different types of music and different sound flavors and tempos in different parts of the day to serve what's necessary at that point.
Yeah.
You want to get in a productive mode, really long tones might not necessarily organize your brain waves to go into more action. It's why people take Adderall, because it actually speeds up the brain waves. So you might want to find certain tempos that are still healthy, that begin to regulate things, but also kind of move them forward a little bit, rather than just sort of like tuning into this like floaty long moment.
So a few ideas came to mind. As a technologist, I love to just have a library or, a tool belt, a tool set that I can just point and listen to it over and over again. But I don't actually know there's any kind of library other than play my own instrument, right? And but as someone who's a beginner who don't understand any of this, I can't duplicate basically what you just demonstrated. Are there musical libraries basically say, hey, if you want to feel stable, play this list. If you want to feel dissonant or
there are. There's been some different technological programs that have organized music in that way. I bet you could even find it on Spotify, different playlists.
Mm.
There's also I don't remember the exact name of it, but it's something like it's the name itself. Let me see if I can look it up real quick. It unfortunately.
So while you look, let me say this: the
Yeah.
ones that I found are complicated musics, because complication, people, the mind likes lots of different flavors. But what I'm looking for personally is 2 notes, 3 notes, the simplicity,
Yeah.
what you describe, what you demonstrated, not the complicated,
Yeah.
piano music all over the place type stuff.
Yeah. Offhand, I'm not sure. Okay, so this thing, it's mynoise.net. And this person has put together all these different noise. He calls sound generators. I wish it wasn't noise, because noise has a negative connotation in my mind. There's difference, versus anyway. And it has a whole lot of different binaural beats, and it's this beautiful thing. You'll love it, man, because you could actually mix in different things that you want to play. It's an amazing tool. As far as some of my earlier music that I've released, which was music for yoga, is basically some of that more simple approach to it. I'd imagine some sort of sound bath experiences with crystal bowls and things that are more slow and intentional. But I think, as you asked that, what comes to mind is there's probably a need for more of it, and I don't know how much of it exists.
Hey man, telling you, there's a group of us who is looking for the simple, not the fancy, right? Yes. So, because to me it's less about, the like a buffet of, I don't need a full buffet. I just want,
yes,
get me to some physiological, emotional state. And also as a way to train myself to deepen my own appreciation and a relationship with sound, right?
Definitely.
So,
which I would say, as a listener,
yeah.
Yes, as a participant in doing the process yourself, it's got to be, I don't know what X return is, but many more. Listening to me play these 2 notes over and over in a meditative way, versus you figuring out or finding out or learning how to do that yourself. The returns are much greater if you become the self generator of it, and I think that's a big part of what I'm sharing.
So I wanted to, let's see, is there anything else that I wanted to say about this? Let's actually move to more of a more esoteric stuff, more mysticism type things. Because you made some, I thought it was really powerful, profound statements, really. You had said mysticism is the exploration of the mystery. So say a little bit more about that. Like, why do you even care to study that? And then we can go from there.
Where did I say that somewhere? Just out of curiosity.
You said it in your yoga of guitar in 4 videos that you published on YouTube.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, as a teacher.
Yeah, I'm just trying to get a orientation to what age did I say this at, and what was I going through at the time?
2015, you said it.
Yeah, I know. It was in Thailand. I had short hair, I believe it. I know what you're talking about. Yeah.
You look a lot like who's that really good looking guy? Oh man, Bradford something. He was in, oh man, tip of my tongue. He was the main star of Limitless.
Of the what?
Limitless.
Oh, I know what you're talking about, but I would disagree. But thank you. Okay, so so mystery.
Bradley Cooper. There you go.
Yeah.
Yes.
One of the things I heard Robert say that really impacted me, Robert Fripp, that let me see how to recall it as close to what he said. Well, that sort of too, mastery comes from the root word of master. I'm paraphrasing, which is masculine. and there's no sort of, in our vernacular, the feminine counterpoint to it. But maybe mystery could be that, if we look at it. So we have mastery and mystery in a way. And I think where people oftentimes go wrong, and myself included, in my previous ages, trying to master the mystery, where you can't master the mystery, first of all, and the mystery isn't to be mastered. And but mysticism would be the exploration of the mystery, I would say. So what is the mystery in life? I mean, it's kind of like, it could all of it in a way. Like what is reality? What is spirituality? What is spirit? What is God? How do rituals change our internal space, soul, all these types of things? So I found interest in exploring, less so now, honestly, but what's going on? And at a level that seemingly science can't touch or answer, or hasn't yet, or even the mind, something deeper, like when I feel something that one might call divinity or the divine experience or my soul, what is that thing? And what are these different traditions that have formed around that? Kabbalah has been a big part of my study. Sufism, to some degree, specifically via Hazrat Inayat Khan, who wrote amazing books, The Mysticism of Sound and Music, that really explored this relationship that we could feel and sense, and words might become very poetic and lead us to it, but never really get us there. So it felt like, I guess, from a very young age, I've been a seeker and very curious to what is going on, like something top level societal interaction never felt like the real stuff to me.
Yeah.
Identities, occupations, like, I guess, egoic relationship to life in the world. From a very young age, just was like, no, that's not it. And maybe my experiences with music and my just love for music and musicians and what that seems to be led that inquiry. And I think part of it, the mysticism of literally sound and music, is like beyond all the vibrations, all the stuff we just talked about, and the neural networks and this and that. Like, what the fuck, like how is it that we've had that music is here? Like, what is that even? Like beyond just like the intellectual approach. I'll give a quick kind of like intrigue that I've had that seems to sort of like give an example of this. It's the relationship to music as an intelligence that goes beyond this world, let's say. So if we think about music as a means to help organize consciousness, organize people, and evolve it, and not just from a scientific standpoint, but sort of from this understanding of it's a consciousness entering in our world to guide us somewhere. So pre-verbal humans, whatever those things might have been, they're together in small little groups. Somebody's hunting, they capture something, they find some food, they want to call the group together, they don't know how to do it because they don't have words to use for it. So maybe they make a sound. There's lots of sounds in the environment, so maybe they pick up a log and smack it together. Well, that's just a singular sound, and that might engage the attention of awareness. Oh, something just happened. I don't know what it is. It could be random. Let's say there's two. That's beginning to become a pattern that engages the awareness even deeper into, something that's more than just something random, but it still might be random. But I'm a little bit more called to the sound. Then you have a 3 pattern. Now we have a pattern. Chances of that being random are highly unlikely compared to it being intentional. That organizes the mind a little bit more into seeking for that. Now people are coming together. Now maybe they're participating together. That's bringing them into synchrony. Then maybe that helps them survive a little bit better. And now they're humming some sounds, and then they find some words to the sounds. And now they're encoding the history into songs and being able to transfer information from one generation to the other before you could write things down through songs. And that helps people exist better and function better and evolve. As they evolve better, the music becomes more complex because their consciousness is becoming more complex. And eventually they discover the different notes, Pythagoras, for example, and harmonies and the math of it. And then eventually that helps them organize their mind to come to another level of being. Then you begin to have more elaborate music and harmony, classical music, complexities of that continues to evolve the brain, brings people together. Then eventually you have, like rock and roll and electronic music, which is very precise and gets into very, very small frequency development and relationships, which is way more complex than any other music has been in the history of humanity, which also now is bringing people together in a certain way and bringing the brain together. So we could look at all of that from just sort of an anthropological standpoint, but we could also look at that from a mystical standpoint of consciousness has guided us along the way to develop using music as this path. And, that is curious to me and a mystery that I don't have like the answers for, but there's something deep in the exploration of it.
Yeah. So someone who is an engineer trained, right? Music to me for a long time was just a form of passive entertainment. It wasn't until plant medicine ceremony, then I was like, oh, there's so much more beyond what I heard, what I thought I heard. Because all I did was I hear the notes, but I didn't really listen. I didn't really internalize. I didn't really reflect on the internal basis. And that actually reminds me of the Tao Te Ching. The opening line is, if you can articulate the Tao, it's not the eternal Tao. However, poetry and music gets closer.
Yes.
You can actually feel the in-between spaces as well as the notes actually receive the wisdom, in the sounds that you beautifully articulated. So, so yeah, thank you for sharing that. So one thing that you said is everything is vibration and music is a tool that actually ultimately unites everyone. Can you say a little bit more about that? Like how you think about the world through the lens of vibration and how you use this powerful tool, right? That access that eternal Tao.
Yeah, I mean, and I think this is where the mystics of the ancient times, specifically the rishis in the yoga texts, Kabbalists, Sufi, even Christian, not like Gnostics to some degree, in other traditions, understood everything as this vibratory universe, specifically in the yogic mysticism, like authentic tantra, and which, just to differentiate, is not neo tantra.
Actually, I don't know the difference. Can you say more about that?
Yes, neo tantra is like the modernization of like Osho is, for example, kind of one of the founders of what we call neo tantra. Most people, when they hear the word tantra, they think sex. Authentic tantra, while there is an aspect of that is not, it goes much deeper than that. It's like getting into mantra and internal alchemy and all these types of things. The neo-tantric movement is basically, for lack of a better word, a bastardization of the word and the concept of uniting polarities, completely like focused in on intimacy, and all of that. And most of stuff that's...
Sorry, can you back up 2 sentences?
Sure.
You asked me one more time. So say that again one more time, please.
The neo-tantra, the differentiation.
Yeah.
Basically, it's pretty much a bastardization of the concept. One of the main concepts of authentic tantra is polarities, Shiva, Shakti, masculine, feminine, inner, outer, and the merging of the two. So neo tantra kind of was like, oh well, like sex is doing that,
like sexualize it, kind of a thing.
Yeah, which is a part of authentic tantra, but it's not the primary focus. And sort of neo tantra made it all about that, and pretty much made up a bunch of practices and called it tantra. That some of them may have some connection to the authentic practices, most don't, and most are basically this thing, which I don't want to say is negative, because I think it does, like, it can really be helpful for people. But just to differentiate, when I am speaking about tantra, it's actually the authentic texts and not what we would consider neo tantra. So anyway, mystics understood everything as a vibrational thing, the universe itself as a vibrational entity. And this is, I think, as far as my understanding of current day physics, is where their science is getting to as well. Like that string theory and everything is sort of these vibrational patterns. I mean, that at the subatomic level, we find vibration, we find electrons spinning and the whole deal, creating molecules, which are not, when we zoom in, are not a static thing, but actually in movement. And that creates crystallization that we would call matter, which seems very, very stable and not moving. But if we zoomed in, we would see that there is movement. And if we zoom out into the more macro universe, we see there's movement as well. Well, we're on a planet that is moving around a star that's also in motion. And the galaxy, the Milky Way, is spiraling in movement. So as far as our observation, we could see both the macro and the micro as movement being a constant, although movement can coalesce into forms of stability, which is where I see music as sort of this etheric thing that it does. It coalesces stability to some degree with movement. So when those notes are vibrating in relationship that's stable, it's almost like we have a musical molecule in a way, and we could build upon that. And then there's levels of dissonance, just like in chemistry, we break apart molecules. I don't know chemistry, but I think that's what they do, or if you transform things from one state into another, changing things up, and there's an act of dissonance in that movement, or changing the tempo where it becomes unstable. When you heat up water, you're literally changing the tempo of water. Temperature, temp is the root of it, where those molecules are getting faster and faster and faster, where they begin to release their matter form, or and become gas at that point, versus when you slow down the tempo of water, i.e. make it colder temperature, it begins to crystallize into literal crystals, into ice crystals. So there's a play of balance and change and all this type of things, which I think music is a beautiful map to all of that. Basically, that's one of the aspects of it.
Yeah, no, this is great. I really appreciate that. So if you kind of look at the fractal nature of really from the molecules to human beings to family unit to Earth to to communities to societies and the whole planet, and then universal, right? So you can go all the way up, all the way down, right? Yeah. So how are you, from your perspective, because you share part of your yoga of sound is to use sound as a way to self-regulate.
Yes.
The self. And so let's actually inquire further beyond the self. How do you see sound / music as a way to access the consciousness of, well, again, oneself, as well as the group, as well as, family unit and so on, expansion from that?
Yeah, well, I think, like the harmony of oneself as the primary thing, as a musician, to play something that is harmonious. And I'm not necessarily just talking about harmonious sounds, but let's say stable, even if it's dissonant. There's a way to do that is stable, or it's further away, harder to hear that as music versus something that has more regulation to it. So in order for a musician to begin to invoke, let's say, the presence of music, there's a necessity of inner regulation that's necessary, that begins with the individual. When two or more people do that together, something greater occurs. A band playing together in sync together creates something that's the sum is larger than the parts. Something greater comes from that. In doing so, now you have, let's say, 3 or 4 people internally synced up to themselves and their process and this intelligence of music, and with each other, who are all doing that as well. So there's kind of these greater levels of feedback loop of individual alignment and awareness of alignment with music, and specifically time, kind of as, let's say, one of the etheric grids or the intangible grids within all that. That's coalescing and creating something that attracts humans. When a human hears, let's say, a group of 4 people or 40 doing that, I think it help we resonate it, we feel it, something, it aligns the listener as well, especially if they're listening deeper. So the deeper that they're able to listen, the more internal alignment they're getting, dependent on how aligned those people are. Here's just a great example. And when I speak of genres, I don't speak of them in any negative term. Just look at the function of it.
Mm-hmm.
Look at the function of punk music on the being. Punk is it's an answer to too much order. Let's say when punk music came out, it's and it was ordered disorder, and it kind of creates ordered disorder. If you even look at the fashion of punk music, the asymmetries of the thing and the spikes, and like it has this sort of thing. And if you looked at people slam dancing, for example, you see quite literally this violence being generated by the music, this aggression, because the music is sort of, people are receiving the aggression of the people and they're expressing it. I'm not saying that's good or bad. That's just kind of doing what that is. Sometimes it can be cathartic. If you look at other music that might help, people come into a level of love together, for example, music that is expressing love, the musician is tuning into the frequency of love or the experience of it, and then the listener feels that. So the listener sort of is receiving this combination of musician, human filters, music as a transcendental type of thing. Anyway, it generates group, not only individual coalescence, but group coalescence. So two people can dance together in rhythm. Now you're having two people syncing up their internal rhythms, their heartbeat, their breath, their neural patterns. And when that happens, I think we experience something that feels more of a unity than a dissonance. When people begin to resonate together, become entrained together, there's a sense of merging that I don't know why it is, but we seem to like it as humans. And it seems that the more we do that, the more we exist in peace. And the more we are in different rhythms or notes or whatever, the more potential for clash. Sometimes there could be beautiful opposites attract, but sometimes there can be clash. So I think part of the function of music as a mysticism is that it's this intelligence that's helping people organize into greater synchrony as humans to recognize unity and hopefully bring more peace into the world, which I think we could actually see that it's done even.
Oh, how so?
Well, let's look at the music that came through the 60s, for example. So you could see the music from the 40s or 50s, like when rock and roll kind of began, rock and roll shook things up, shake it up, baby. Like it, and even the patterns are actually a little bit asynchronous to heartbeat that kind of alerts and stimulates the nervous system. I think humanity needed that. We're just coming off of our Second World War, where we dropped the most destructive bombs that have ever been developed in humanity. Real serious shit at that point. The impact of war all of a sudden was magnified to a degree that humanity had never felt before. And I think something needed to change, and something did change. Like after that, I feel like part of the music was to help wake people up out of a certain trance, in a way, of differences, and come into alignment for some degree. And then you have it kind of culminating, at least in my mind, in Woodstock, where you have 500,000 people or so, no fights, everyone coming together to listen to a music that seems to be channeled from something more than just, and this is a pre-Rockstar even, at least the commodification of the music industry. But this is people who were called to this music. Jimi Hendrix, he wasn't trying to be something. That's who he was. This was coming through him, and it brought people together into a different level of consciousness. So I feel like that movement changed the course of humanity in a way, and the sort of movement of music into a carrier of love and harmony, and coming from that place has seeded, that continues to happen today, a different level of consciousness that is looking towards agreements and commonalities, rather than being stuck in you're that, I'm this, you're different than, and you're bad, therefore.
So I have a two-part question, right? So the first part question is, do you feel that the popular music of the time is a direct reflection of the consciousness of the collective whole? So that's the first
Yeah.
part question. It's a big question, but
Great.
I'm
Let's
curious
do
to know
it.
your thoughts, right?
Uh-huh.
The second part of the question is, I don't know if you ever watched Elizabeth Gilbert's TED Talk. She talked about the concept of a muse, being a channel, a conduit, and having a muse, one with or a genius, visit her. And if she's not ready as the conduit, a vessel, she would then visit another writer. So she shared an example between Michael Jackson and Prince as an example, right? And Prince or Michael Jackson would say, hey, if I don't write this song, Prince is gonna write it. Similar concept, right?
Yeah.
So I'm curious to know your thoughts about, right? Let me recap the question. Do you feel like the music, popular music at the time, is a direct reflection of our consciousness? And two, the whole idea of being a conduit, a vessel for the muse to come visit.
Yeah, I think it's definitely a reflection of the consciousness and the zeitgeist at the moment. And it also seems to be something of the future calling us forward to it.
A future what?
The future calling us forward to it.
Mm-hmm.
That there's something about the current, generally, like current music times, and I think it's expedited now, especially with technology and the sort of the digital part of the aspect, which has really changed a lot of parts about music. But there's something when I listen to like some music, I'm like, shit, this is the future. Like, even though it's right now, but it's like calling us forward into something. I think that's part of the benevolence and the intelligence of music, is that it's organizing us into a more harmonious, complex future moment, basically. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Yeah, it's more of a, well, I think you said it beautifully, calling us forth.
Yeah. And a reflection of the moment, and different musics like are different reflections and serve kind of different purposes. When hip hop first evolved, I mean, that was a music that was necessary for a culture to express pain and bring awareness to injustice. And I think that music was born from that. I think it's changed into something else now. I mean, well, it definitely has. There's a great Netflix series, The Evolution of Hip Hop, that really is well done and goes from the disco, the merging of disco. Anyway, so music can be different things, but I think it's always a reflection of the moment, and generally a guiding into the future. Potentially, there's some destructive music, I would say, as well, or music that has some destructive consequences, just sonically and vibrationally and mentally and mindset and all of that. Second question, I don't think it quite works like that. Like, if I don't get it, somebody else will. I don't know, but that doesn't make sense to my own personal model of how the whole thing works.
Okay. Well, I mean, looking at as a student of vibrations, as a teacher, as a musician, as a someone who actually creates and produces music, as a trainer of other people who getting into music and sound. And then now we're just hypothesizing here.
Yeah. Well, have we been all along?
Yeah, in a very divided world that we are in today, what kind of music is yearning to be born? I mean, brought into the world.
Boy, is the world divided? I hadn't noticed.
Polarized.
Man, that's a really great question. I mean, one of the things I really love about right now is the diversity of artistry that's available and continuing to evolve. As a musician, I don't love Spotify's royalty payment model because it is not so equitable. As a lover of music, I love Spotify because it is not only gives me, the listener, access to so much music, but there's also like the AI generative. It figures out what I like, and I don't have a defined taste. It's not like I like blues and it sends me a bunch of blues. I like weird, undefinable things, and somehow it finds new artists to send me that I really love. So I think there is the beauty of the diversification of music right now is amazing, because I think there's more room than ever for an artist to share their unique voice that touches people, and the less need to have a mass audience. Mass audiences were more necessary in the past because it didn't make sense to print any less than X amount of albums or CDs, because there was just like hard cost to doing it. It didn't make sense to tour to unless there's X amount of people. So you kind of needed a certain level of foundation, critical mass, to make it sustainable. That's not the case now. You know, sort of like the I forgot who wrote that thing, but the 1,000 true fans. I mean, you know, like
Kevin Kelly.
Yeah, I mean, just that model. So, like, you know, somebody like myself, who I haven't released any music recently, but my music that I've released for yoga, there's a consistent amount of listens that blows my mind that it happens. That wouldn't have happened in the 80s. That many people buying the CD, finding the CD, it just wouldn't have happened. But now, like, the distribution model has become decentralized. So I think well, I don't know what type of music it is. I think it's more of perhaps the diversity of music that becomes available to speak to different people who need to hear different messages in a certain way. And there's sort of, as humanity become more diverse individuals, and I think that's part of what is part of the divide in a way, is like a growing pains of more uniqueness, you know, and both of sides of the division, I think, are freaked out by it in a way. You know, you've got like the conservatives freaked out by people who are playing with gender fluidity and different, you know, and different aspects of identity. And then you've got people on the left freaked out by people who are playing with different levels of sovereignty and exploring what does freedom really mean, and what is civilian right versus government. Anyway, I think there's like depth. I think part of it is new versions of freedom that people are exploring that can create a dissonance from different perspectives. And I think maybe the healing of it is both embracing that we're growing into greater levels of diversity, and that the music offers that for different people, and maybe sort of guides us to embracing that, rather than that we could have a harmony of diversity rather than homogeny of unity, I guess.
Yeah. So are there any tools, or so in my mind, right? I'm a student of technology, as you know, right? I like mental models and frameworks and
yes, me too.
Technologies as well, right? And I'm an entrepreneur, you're an entrepreneur. So what are some of the up and coming tools that you've come across that you feel is more conducive, empowering for you to really help bring your Tao, you know, to others?
Who, me personally, or more general?
Yeah. Well, I mean, through your lens, you know, what have you observed that you're excited about? Oh, this particular technology, this particular tool that empowers artists like you to, you know, make the kind of difference and impact that you want to make.
Yeah. I haven't seen anything new that I feel. Well, okay, we could look at it in three levels, I think. So there's there's a generation generating music. So that would be some sort of education thing, which I think Zoom online trainings is amazing, because we continue to decentralize that, like the need for that. I think kids learning from YouTube videos, like just the amount of information that's available to learn from is greater than ever. And therefore I think it's expediting process of learning. There's, you know, VHS tapes you could order for $50 of the guitar player. And that was it was that or your local teacher. Now you have the world available. So I think decentralization of education is huge, and helping people learn music. I think as programs get simpler, like Ableton Live, for example, you know, GarageBand is a starter program. People have the experience of beginning to work with a recorded medium of music and alter it and change it in a way that is makes making music easier. The process of actually creating it, at least like at the functional level, not the creative level, but at least at the technical level.
Yeah, and the mechanical level. Yep.
The mechanical level, yeah. And then the education to do that along with that. And then decentralized distribution models that are AI driven to begin to figure out what people like and give them music that they like that inspires them to create more. Like I get inspired by the music I hear.
Mm-hmm.
And then AI would obviously, I'm sorry, virtual reality would obviously in AR would be the next step. That I have some visions. I don't feel ready to speak publicly on it because I would like to develop them. But
See.
I think beginning to see and experience music in the fourth dimension, which we don't normally do. When music is written, notation, it's two-dimensional, and it's binary and it's very abstract from like dots on a paper with lines means absolutely nothing.
Mm-hmm.
We understand the representation of what it means and we learn that. It's a very abstract and laborious model that has been functional, but with the advent of depth and movement, we actually can begin to engage with music in an AR or VR way that music is more akin to how music really is. I think, Guitar Hero is sort of like is a primitive version of that, where you're moving through time while you're playing. Well, that's what you're doing when you're playing. So to have visual representation, especially in a 3 and 4th dimensional representation, I think will begin to expand a lot of things.
Mm. Yeah, actually, what comes to mind is the VR meditation app called Trip. Essentially, you have music coming your way. You essentially can visualize meditation, which is paradoxical because the whole point of meditation is to go inward, not to look at the VR world.
Yeah.
But I digressed. Another idea came to mind as you were speaking is, I don't know if you played this game before. I don't know the name of the game. Essentially, you have two knives and things are coming your way. You're slicing them, and you can actually use that to create music as a possibility. I'm not a gamer, but that's just something that my.
Yeah, I haven't seen that game either, but yeah, I mean, music is a play of space and time.
Yeah,
So
I think what actually would be really interesting as an exploration. We'll have to come up with a solution right now. It's not just the creative aspect of it, because we have more channel of distribution, yes, but I think fundamentally what could be really interesting is thinking about how artists can collaborate with each other more in a AI suggested kind of a way. Hey, if you like Josh's music, you might like CK's music. Josh and CK, you guys should work together, have a collaboration so you can cross-pollinate your audience. So that way you have more and more of that moat, right?
Yeah.
And the true fans grows accordingly. So that way you're not dependent on distribution channel like Spotify as a way to help, support and monetize your lifestyle as a creator. Yeah, just a thought. I don't have a solution, but that's something I think would be really interesting, kind of as a way to seamlessly collaborate with other similar audiences, so then you can grow your audience accordingly.
Yeah, I think I like the idea of like AI driven by taste to bring collaborators together. I think that like that's pretty brilliant. It hasn't been done before. I had the idea some years back of a dating app that was based on your Spotify listens. Because I have this hypothesis: if you have the same taste of music, chances are you'll get along. Whether it's a romantic connection, I don't know, but like there's some, I think chances are you'll get along. So
there you go.
Yeah.
So guys, if you're listening, hey, we just offer you some brilliant ideas. Check it out. Let us know. Cut us in on the Founders Talk.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. Last question. I want to be super respectful of your time. Last question is this. So thinking back on what young Josh, what he was struggling with, dealing with, what would be, we said a lot of different things and tactics and frameworks throughout this entire conversation. What would be like the one thing, if the young Josh can hear what you're about to share, it would really help him?
Yeah. Can I ask what, like how young?
The beginning part of his entrepreneur career, where he's facing self-doubt, where he's facing, what should I do? Go to the left or go to the right? Or reinventing myself.
Yeah.
As a musician to entrepreneur, what would you say to the young Josh listening?
I would say to allow both time and space to explore, and to do your best to mitigate stress, anxious, panic responses along the way. To invest equal time into tuning into intuition and clearing distractions and static and noise that get in the way. So, in parallel with action, also internal work and making sure that the internal world is being tuned in and nourished. To work towards a lower valuation than a higher valuation. I think.
What does that mean? I didn't understand that.
Yeah. Like, we all want the big ticket item that scales so that we can have the maximum ROI. You know, I think, yeah, like to focus rather than like impressive maximum ROI, what is lowest level sustainable ROI first, and tune into that rather than trying to just the 6 or 7 figure a year thing right off the bat, the big launch. Like, let's work on the sustainable ROI that feels good. It feels in alignment with you. If you're getting caught up in technical stuff and that is losing the engagement, find a simpler way to do it. Specifically, rather than trying to figure out the whole sequence of autoresponders and the thing and the click funnels and the thing and the thing. If that is not working, is there an easier way? If it takes more manual labor than automation, maybe that's okay. So again, rather than trying to just scale ROI, time, money, return, everything from the get-go, like just get it functional and proof of concept, and not just proof of concept from a sales and a monetary way, but from a way that what you're offering is working. So focus in on the actuality of the product, for lack of a better word, the offering, the process that you are trading for money. Like, work on that and trust that when that's developed and that's coming from a place of value and support for other people, then the return will begin to happen naturally. And then the scale will also begin to happen as a natural reflection of that. Those are the things I would say.
Thank you so much, Josh. Let me take a moment to really acknowledge you. I so appreciate you as a friend, as a colleague, as a teacher, as a mentor, and everything that you stand for and what you do. And in this conversation, you share very generously with your journey of someone who, desires to be a musician, who is super heady, to, being a master teacher. You share with us also, your teaching philosophy, what makes a great teacher and not so great teacher, right? You share with us also on your philosophy around how music is a tool to access the mystery of the universe. A little bit about that too as well. So we went a lot of different grounds, and I think for the younger CK or Josh or anyone who is starting their career, reinventing themselves, your last tip was definitely on point about how to actually focus on the atomic unit of the offer versus getting to all the fancy automation tools, the models and the funnels and all that stuff. So that way people can continue to give their gift, starting to make the kind of difference they want to make. So thank you so much for the way you show up on our conversation.
Yeah. Thank you, CK. And I'll take a moment to acknowledge you, which is, this is really delightful, a real beautiful experience. You hold a wonderful space of good questions and inquiry, and your ability to listen brings forward things. It's sort of like in music, the depth of the listener will bring the musician out, and that could be the individual listener and musician or the audience. So I found just through this an ability to find an expression that oftentimes is not so available with me, or I have the opportunity to open that channel. So I really appreciate you as a facilitator to open that. And it's a real gift. And
thank you.
I see I see that gift expanding, and it benefits a lot of people. So so thank you for holding the space and the invitation. I really appreciate you.
Thank you so much. With that said, we'll complete.
We're almost at like Joe